Hello and welcome to the Robert and Frances Fullerton Museum of Art. We're glad you're here to join us this evening, and I want to ask that before the talk starts that you turn your cell phones to silence, and we'd also like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We recognize that Cal State University San Bernardino sits on the territory and ancestral lands of the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. We recognize that every member of the California State University San Bernardino community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution was founded in 1965. We are very happy this evening to have Taylor Moon Castagnari here to talk a little bit about her drive-through themed exhibition, where she reimagines the American stereotypes and subcultures as symbolic highway signage and flags, recreating the sensation of roadside pollution in the gallery space by barraging the viewer with capitalist, Americanized icons and imagery. Taylor Moon is a contemporary artist and educator whose primary medium is poetically narrated animations. She received her Bachelor of Art degree from the University of California, Santa Barbara, with a double major in art and art history, and her Master of Fine Arts from the University of Oxford's Ruskin School of Art. She has taught nationally and internationally, and we're proud to say that she's now an assistant professor of graphic design at California State University, San Bernardino. When Taylor finishes her talk, we'll take questions and answers, and we'll ask that you speak into the microphone so that it makes it onto the live feed of the talk. Thank you.
All right, hello everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. For my students that are tuning in, I know you already listened to me a lot, and I'm sure the extra credit was a great incentive for listening to me some more. I first wanted to thank everyone at the RAFFMA for providing me with this opportunity and assisting me in some very grand ideas of using 22-foot vinyl. So thank you, John and Michael and Dan and Mary and everybody who assisted in this project, from creating the bench with the car seats built into them to everything in between with like mounting and organizing the metal panels. So to intro my talk, I'm using this very flattering image of myself. I was considering if I were to start eating in the middle of my talk, more like start eating fast food and fries, it would seem somewhat irreverent. It would not befit a museum or like lecture hall space. I began to ask myself though, like, why? Why would it be considered vulgar and unprofessional to enjoy a tasty container of French fries? I specifically considered this because French fries are part of our culture, and attending things like artist talks are also where you go to learn more about life and culture. In fact, attending an artist talk feels like the very cultured thing to do because you're taking time out of your day to hear about how an artist sees and perceives the world. The everyday moments that I'm exploring in my work, ones in which my feet are up on the dash, I got my jams going, I'm with my husband and we decide between orders number 2 and 3 in the drive-through line, seem very lowbrow and non-academic, but those are the ones that I'll be exploring in my talk. So, hopefully I'm not making you all too hungry with the food references. It's 5 p.m. after all. All this to say, I wondered if I were to create art that replicates a daily commute and recreates the act of ordering at a drive-thru, would the museum goer feel rushed to go through my exhibition? Would they feel like they're waiting in line, have to check the box to see the work? I considered whether they would take in the imagery like a car accident on the side of the road. You wait your turn to get to the front impatiently just to get a glimpse of whatever the train wreck is, only to proceed and drive on towards the next gallery space. Thus, my work, The Drive-Thru Nation, is not simply critiquing American food, transportation, establishments, and organizations, but the means of engagement that we have with these forms of culture. So to quickly describe each of the elements and the intent of the exhibition, as you enter, you'll see a large title wall with an exhibition description, housed within a fast food ordering sign. I wanted to really immerse the viewer and sell them on the experience that they're going through their daily commute. The viewer walks past some large-scale vinyl prints of roadside signs, probably things that you've seen and experienced on your drive on the way to this talk. I was trying to create a sense of visual clutter and overstimuli, like what you would see just browsing through social media, but also what you would see on the side of the road. Throughout the gallery, the viewer will see a stack of tires, hanging flags, and metal prints. On one of the walls, there is a grid of metal prints which rework roadside signs and flags into their own symbolic designs. On another wall, the metal prints also show off scenes of off-the-road attractions and spectacles and drive-thrus with symbolic flags and signs. One of the large-scale flags that I have depicts symbols of a pyramid scheme in carnivalesque colors. The garish colors make you feel as though everything the flag represents is somehow rigged, like a carnival game, or is intended to toy with you. Stars are added to give a sense of mock patriotism for the backwards capitalism the flag represents. The other flag depicts America's worship of Hollywood culture and its enamor with celebritydom. And the motifs of the flag show elements of the Oscars as well as the Walk of Fame. One of the large-scale walls depicts a roadside scene with a towering fast food sign which says, "Outsourced labor, hormone-injected cattle, and lab to table." And I'm outing myself here as a gluten-intolerant individual with many food sensitivities. I find it difficult to navigate the American food market, especially when it's laden with biogenetically engineered food. Individuals must pay premium too for anything that's considered naturally grown or whole foods. So it really does feel like they're marketing or profiting off of those who prioritize health and basic fulfillment of that human need. So foods that pass for non-GMO, organic, farm to table, or not from concentrate, these are probably familiar phrases to you. They take advantage of that label, like I said, to kind of make that extra profit, and I thought that was really interesting. On one of the final walls that you see before exiting the gallery into Rob Ray's amazing exhibit, if you haven't already listened to that recording, I definitely recommend listening to that artist talk, especially if you want to question everything after. But on that final wall, you'll see a wall with a vinyl food pickup window. And in that window is housed a monitor displaying myself in a vehicle looking out into the world, representing my process of filming scenes outside the car window and later converting them into animation. I'll go a little bit more into that process a bit later, but you'll also notice Also depicted in the monitor is the internationally acclaimed artist Samson Kumbalu, who is currently on display at the 4th Plinth in Trafalgar Square. The monitor plays an animated interview in which we discuss similarities across both of our work in terms of energy, metaphor, and sense of play. I'll go more into depth on that topic in a little bit, though. So for many countries, mealtimes are an important social activity centered around like conversation, intentional savoring of the food. The capitalist mentality, though, of America strives for constant productivity and efficiency. The 30-minute lunch break does not really exist. This mantra hurries the process of not only consuming, but also hurrying the making process of the food. So I want you to consider each time when you multitask during your lunch break. Eating, like art, is a cultural experience, and I was curious as to what fast food says about American culture. Does it speak to mass production? Not only are the people made to feel like numbers, but the way of life is also systematized. Does the genetically modified food ingredients point to something maybe counterfeit or fake or cheapened about our culture? Those were the sort of things I was grappling with as I was making this exhibition. So I began to wonder about other aspects of our culture that have become expedited and subsequently diminished in the process. The phenomenon of fast fashion and speed dating also came to mind when I was thinking about that. Fast fashion causes a lot of environmental waste. It has to keep up with the demand of like the hot it trends, and subsequently a lot of labor and human working conditions suffer as a result of that. And grossly injustice pay and things of that nature. And so I felt like this was sort of reminiscent of what I was thinking about with fast food. It's cheap clothing that will likely tear after first wash, but is produced quickly and easily. And so I was thinking about what other parallel compromises might be seen in that. I was also curious why farm to table is advertised so much when you would think that is more the expectation rather than the something that's more irregular. So I was also considering hormone-injected livestock, chemically altered food, and then how all of these seem to replicate the oversaturation of sign pollution and advertising also coincides with this like cheap feeling and this barrage of constant attention-grabbing media, which seems to like devalue quality a little bit. Simultaneously, I was thinking about American reliance on automotive transportation and how this all fit in together. Aside, but the time I was making this was during COVID, and so it was a very contemplative time for everybody. But the American reliance on automotive vehicles also feels very detached. It's not like this first-person engagement that we have here. You're watching something through a window, and often that's associated with why people have more road rage, is because you feel very detached from the different car entities driving around you. And comparatively, I was considering my time studying in my MFA in Oxford in the UK, and how different that was experientially traveling on foot or traveling by bus, where you're surrounded by people and embracing culture in every mode of transportation. Billboards in the US stretch high in the sky to grab the attention of viewers at a great distance. This actually reminded me of a moment in Meet the Robinsons where they make the signs very, very long, so that way you can read them going at like hypersonic speeds, and they just really stretch out the words, and it kind of felt like that's the direction that we're going in. High-rise signs utilize like every form of visual hierarchy that you can possibly use with like garish colors, crazy LEDs, splashy imagery, like all the font contrasts. So it makes you think, okay, if all of the signs are using all of the like visual hierarchy methods to make me look at it, how do I know which sign to look at? And so I was curious about incorporating that into the work in the gallery. So given this, you might think, okay, well, what is the main work in the exhibition? You might think it's one of the giant 22-foot vinyl wall illustrations that you have to like pose with and have a lot of bright and colorful imagery on them. However, instead, it's more the animation that you have to sit down in front of in the car seat and have like more of a contemplative personal moment with, because only 2 people can really sit there at a time with it, and you need to really listen in for the audio due to like sound competition and lack of subtitles. So this further compounds like the rationale behind roadside signage, because you think the larger that it is, the more important it must be. Okay, so as I said a moment ago, I began creating the work The Drive-Thru Nation during the onset of COVID-19 in 2020. I found that the act of like social distancing during the pandemic forced me to pay attention to visual and social patterns in a different way. I also spent a lot more time in the car trying to entertain myself, given that we couldn't see other individuals as much. Living in a new place right before the pandemic also gave me a shifted perspective. So I was forced to look at my new environment with a different lens. I was a Southern California native. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, in the Northridge area, and I had just finished my, after that I had moved to the UK to study at Oxford. And so, and from the UK I moved to Missouri, so it was a lot of shifting around in time and place. And as someone who is American going to the UK, you find that your points of view are not as central or primary as one would think, and you're more open to global cultures and other ways of thinking, that you realize that your own ways of thinking might be strange to others. And so returning to the US and getting my first teaching job in Missouri, I then started to look at things as, oh, are these like what I find as like normative, like actually really strange? So looking at it from that vantage point. My process of creating the Drive-Thru Nation was also inspired and in conversation with Samson Kambalu's work, who I mentioned earlier was the artist. He was also my professor and tutor at the University of Oxford. He also does work in flags, and so this is how that arose. At the time, I'd done work on cheerleading when I worked with him, which also has a lot of color and animated energy. And so when we were conversing about his flags, I started to realize other elements of like energy and play in everyday American culture. So his contemporary flag designs originated from like flag-based trading cards called Dandy Bubblegum. And on the playground, children would shuffle these cards and then trade them. And the act of shuffling them would like obscure the designs of the cards or cause them to kind of visually meld together. And so that's how he created his abstracted flags. So talking about trading cards, that's a very communal experience, whereas I feel looking at flags outside my car window is a very individualist experience where only I am engaging in it at that particular instance in time. So I thought that was a very interesting contrast there. I was also curious about how Malawi gift culture described by Sampson contrasted with American capitalist culture. I'll go back. Some of the slides on here are not translated over there. So, in the Drive-Thru Nation exhibition, I displayed the animation on an interview about how both of our work, again, share a sense of play, and we converse about how each of our works includes bright and animated colors. They're not. Is there any way to get the more updated version? I mean, it doesn't, I guess.
You have a newer version you sent?
Yeah, it's the same Google Drive, but that's okay.
Okay, you can go out. All the slides are great.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, a lot of them I added in new illustrations, some of which were in the gallery and some of which I created for, like just for the talk to be kind of in conversation with some of the work in the gallery.
Do you want to tell Diego what?
Do you want me to look up, is it back there?
No,
No, okay, it's okay. It'll be fine. Okay. So some of the images that I wanted to show were images that show the actual photos from which some of these illustrations were derived, because it was a really interesting process sitting in my car and having my husband drive, and then we see like suddenly like the car wash that's right like across the street with the balloon man and all of the flags, and me going, wait, stop, drive slower, I need to get a video of this, and being really excited about some of these interesting moments. And of course, 4th of July and a bunch of other very patriotic events were very fun to film, like while looking for these references. Even looking at like lawn ornaments and windmills and things of that nature were very, very fun to film. So the next part of the talk that I wanted to incorporate was reading from the poetic text that's seen on the animation in the exhibition. So the audio in there, I know it can't always like be heard the best, or if you're walking through the gallery, you won't necessarily know when the video like starts or stops. You may be joining in like partway through it, so I figured it would be helpful to go through it chronologically and to maybe grasp some of the symbolic meaning in a different light. So in the first line, I ask, is nationalism like genetically modified fast food? Is nationalism like the genetically modified fast food alternative to patriotism? Because when I first heard those two terms defined, I realized they were actually very different in nature. So, patriotism is a non-competitive form of love and commitment to one's country, its members, and the welfare of all. And you'll see like this is a very wholesome image I captured of like a family really enjoying like the 4th of July and being proud to celebrate the that day. Whereas conversely, nationalism coincides more with ideas of superiority, reduced levels of internationalism, prejudice, and militarism. So very different dichotomy there of being proud to be in one's country versus proud to not be in another country, or very isolated to oneself with one's own country. This was actual images I took from a gift shop and then digitized after as well. When reading between the lines and stripes of the American flag, you'll often find aggression and social dominance. So you hear the phraseology, reading between the lines, a good bit of what's said, what's unsaid but actually said. And so I was considering if there's levels of patriotism that are exclusive, not inclusive to others, then what does that say reading between the lines of the red and white stripes of the flag? Line 5 goes, each color is fencing the other in. This was a photo taken from Walmart in which all of the balls with stars and stripes and very patriotic looking sports balls were used, and the idea of like fencing one another in. At the time, it coincided a lot with the Trumpist era. So they cage the flag, fence the land, and border the people. And so that's the idea that the flags, the stripes and lines of the flag are actually very rigid and serving more like fences in their like rigidity. This doesn't just relate to one flag or one nation, but the imperfections of every nation. So I know America has been on the hot seat a little bit today, but pointing out more that I guess the ideology of patriotism and exclusivity isn't isolated to America alone. As sign pollution encroaches, flags get lost amongst billboards and clutters of color. Is their function much different than graffiti? Because the idea of graffiti is that it marks a territory. And so the idea of a lot of like state borders or flags is also to distinguish like zones of ownership and territory. The waving colors of flags flash like casino lights or shine, trying to differentiate themselves like neon club lights. A flag detached from a cause, people, or place is just as playful and vivid as arcade games. Full of pizzazz with minimal rules and promise of many lives. I think that like corresponds a little bit to the American dream a bit. So if we were to rename our country, I considered what is a fast food federation? What is a drive-through nation? Is it a hefty order and a simple thank you for your service in return? So great a freedom for so little acknowledgement of its guardians? Does a drive-through nation relate to rear-view towns? Is it off-the-road attractions every 250 miles or so? And this line particularly pertained to my time in Missouri when I realized that it was a lot different than the like urban upbringing that I'd come to know, with like a lot of activities and attractions kind of wherever you could look, and then realizing that there was actually signs posted for things that you would do, or having to drive in like an hour and a half, 2 hours to see like fantastic caverns or things of that nature. And so I thought that this advertising culture for spectacles off the sides of the road were really interesting to me. So each one boasting its claim as the world's tiniest, longest, highest, or most notable monument or object. Fun fact, when I lived in Missouri, we saw, I think it was called Big Brutus. It was the world's biggest electric shovel. So these types of attractions do exist. It was spectacular. So something with all the color and showmanship of a carnival or circus. Is a drive-through nation simply drag races, dirt roads, or handmade signs crawling higher in the sky to be more prominent? I also, fun fact, went to drag races while in Missouri just to experience what that other form of culture was like. And it was really fascinating seeing some of the cars as they were like taking off with all of their like mechanic modifications, some of them like needing to be extinguished very quickly, and then some of them like lifting off the ground like a rocket. It was quite amazing. The next line asks, what is a supermart society? Does it cater to living in bulk and excess? I then ask, what if each aisle was like its own continent? Because brands in themselves do function like their own like countries in a lot of times, and sometimes people like CEOs can be even more powerful than like politicians. So considering this when navigating my local Walmart. So each aisle its own continent and each brand its own country. Express checkout for the passport stamped, rewards card holder, with 3 items of or less of uncivil activity, no arrests, and a great credit score to prove their status as a good citizen. So I think it's interesting like what we define as what it means to be like a true American or a good citizen. Are the stripes more like barcodes that can be scanned for quick identification and purchase? And by stripes, I'm referring to the stripes on a flag. This item belongs to this brand. This person belongs to this country. Well, what is being purchased? The land, the people, and this is an image of the Trail of Tears routes. So what is a generic relationship to the flag? A collectible item from the gift shop? So kind of thinking about how we've even commercialized our own symbols of nationalism. Is it a magnet to adorn your living spaces? And I just added this for a little bit of satire. Is the flag more like a lawn ornament? Also, again, a photo taken in my apartment plaza in Missouri at the time. Some treat it like garlic, onion, wolfsbane, or sage to ward off what they fear around them. In other words, to repel the out-group members while protecting the inner circle. They're superstitious to invoke powers greater than themselves to back their own biases, the beautiful concept of the flag in misuse. And this is a reference to the January 11th events. For some, the flag is a die-hard symbol of pride, identity, sacrifice, honor, freedom, and united achievement. This kind of refers back to the one of the initial images I showed of that family celebrating 4th of July, and more the idea of like a regrouping to like what it ought to be. Most any color can mosaically comprise a flag. We can really rally behind any like mantra or idea. Almost any cause can start an alliance, such as binge-watching bureaucracies or movie theater monarchies. I feel like that's really united people, especially over the pandemic. A commuter Congress or same-day delivery senates. Or a rodeo republic. One could let almost any lifestyle or power govern their lives. Also, another anecdote, I have gone to a few of my share of rodeos now just to really experience all aspects of cultures, and I would say my favorite is when the kids ride the sheep and try not to get butted off like mini bull riding. It's very fun. Flags are just patchworks of color. Banners are just posters, and anthems are just songs until you give them meaning. And that's the final line of the animation in the exhibit. I realize I have about 15 minutes left, and I did want to open time for questions, albeit in the room or on the YouTube streaming. So is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
The poem was great.
Oh, thank you.
It's the kids on sheep is mutton busting.
Mutton busting. I was trying to remember the word for it. They have like the full helmets and everything, and some kids take it very, very seriously.
Sorry,
my favorite too.
Make sure this is actually working. Diego, are we getting the feed on this? There it goes. Okay. Whoa, sorry. Thank you, Taylor. So we're in our question and answer of the program. But I'm John Flamen. I am the exhibition designer here, and I had the great privilege and pleasure to work with Taylor in designing and installing this exhibition. And it's the first time I've ever done it via Zoom.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. And it's the first time I've used that many square feet of vinyl in an exhibition space. So I think Taylor now has the record for vinyl square footage. Like Mary said, I don't need this microphone clearly, but this is to get our feed to the live stream via YouTube. So I'll walk around and hand the microphone if you have some questions for Taylor. Matthew? Sure. It's pretty hot, so just kind of keep it away.
All right, how's it? Well, thanks, Taylor. Hi there. That was great. I really enjoyed that, and the show is amazing. I was thinking. I mean, I've got so many questions, but I'll just ask one. It provoked so many great thoughts. Your talk. Earlier on, you were talking about the visual pollution and the kind of increased intensity of clashing fonts, garish colors, and so on. And I wondered if you found in your research whether there are like limits to how intense this density of visual information can get before it becomes counterproductive. Because I think to talk to your other subject, which is politics, national politics, I think what's interesting about these midterm elections that we've just been through is that this country has either tacitly or explicitly found a limit of what it will tolerate in terms of nationalism over patriotism. And I wondered if there was some kind of correlation between the two, between the intensity of the noise of the nationalism that frightened a lot of people, including myself, and the noise of a capitalist visuality. I wonder if you found those limits, or if you've noticed ebbs and flows where capitalism backs off and goes quieter and less cluttered and so on.
Yeah, that is a great question with like many compounded layers of sub-questions. I would say whether there are actually any like bylaws of like your sign is allowed to be this obtrusive or this obtrusive, I've not looked up like the extent to which like the signs are allowed to like protrude into their environment. I'm sure there are some in order to keep like safety of driving and things of that nature. I do like your point a lot about how like potency of like the flag imagery and like billboard imagery also kind of coincides with like potency of like strong political opinion. I think that definitely like yeah, those coincide. I would say, I think that probably varies by area because, for example, in like rural Missouri where they're like more spread out in nature, you tend to like notice them more and maybe they can get away with being a little bit more pushing the boundaries of like allowability versus maybe in a more condensed area. There's more people in that area and so therefore maybe more naysayers against it, or it could be the opposite where maybe the more clutter, the more like kind of offensive signs get kind of lost in the mix. So I would say at this point your guess is as good as mine, and I think that's kind of the fun of it.
Any more questions? Yeah, we'll save you for
Okay.
Diego? I think, we also are, obviously, we're live streaming this, so we have some questions that are coming via YouTube. And last week, I tried to read them off of Diego's phone, and my eyesight's not very good. And so I may just have him read it.
Okay.
That's okay.
Sure. We have Rebecca Trawick. She's asking, Taylor, will you continue to explore flags, fast food, signage, billboards, digital signs, etc. in future projects?
So I would say I would definitely be interested in exhibiting this this project elsewhere. However, a lot of my work has to do with like different layered metaphors, comparing like two disjoint things. And so there's other metaphors that I also want to explore in my work that are currently in the works between like museums and circuses or cheerleading in the brain that I think I'll pursue first. However, I'm definitely open to expanding upon this in the future or exhibiting it again.
Great, thank you. There's another question. This one's from Andrew Oakes. He asks, Taylor, was vinyl a purposeful material to work with versus something possibly more permanent?
So I like the vinyl one because it makes me think of like how billboards, like they have that like tear off ability to like change them out easily. I like the ability to kind of go floor to ceiling to really make them feel fully immersed. I would say the flags, or I guess not the flags, but the signs that you see on the highways, those interchange out seasonally, so those aren't permanent. So I don't envision something as permanent like murals or anything of that nature. Although I definitely would want to explore like more sculptural elements too in the future, like having more physical signs in the space that you have to like walk through in order to navigate.
Any more questions? Kathy?
So I noticed in a lot of your illustrations, and I don't know anything about digital illustration, but they have a very either like watercolory kind of effect or even sometimes look like paint by numbers. Mm-hmm. Is that an intentional association?
So I started off as like kind of working more in like painting and the tactile arts. I explored everything from like printmaking to sculpture and welding. And so I think that like when I first started off, all of my illustrations were all like freehand, but looked very similar, but had that like monochromatic style to them. And so, and basically would just like layer opacities and things like that. And then over time, I wanted to clean it up more. And so that's how it got more of that like paint by numbers aesthetic that you've talked about. But I would say mostly it's stemming from a more studio art like background.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Were you having a follow? Okay, sorry. I thought maybe I took it away from her too soon.
There's a question in the back.
Oh, okay.
What was your favorite piece that you made out of the whole exhibit?
Oh, that one's easy. That one is the balloon man because I was like wanting to incorporate that for a while. I know John and I had talked about bringing an actual balloon man to the front of the museum just to like kind of cheapen the whole experience and like parade people in. And it was just fun having friends and family come along and pose alongside Mr. Balloon Man. I felt very pop art-like.
Any question?
Sorry, I'm just walking into the presentation, and kind of my general takeaway of the presentation is it's almost like an outsider. It feels like an outsider viewing, kind of, yeah. It feels like an outsider taking a look at their own home, you know. But so it's interesting how you approach this. It's almost like you're on a journey of like self-discovery or like labels. And it's interesting to look at flags because again, one person might see a flag with a sense of pride, and another might see it as a symbol of, terror. And so it's interesting to kind of think of the idea of flags as a unifier or a divider, but then how we ourselves feel represented in those flags and in those symbols. So my question is really like, how do you feel after exploring this? How do you feel represented, or did you discover anything about yourself and how you connect to these flags and these labels?
I would say I feel more divided and playful at the same time. Divided in that the parts about like exclusionistic mentalities really make me like mourn, because I want everybody to be able to represent their diversity and feel like that flag encompasses them as well. I think though that there was also really beautiful moments as well when I was going throughout filming and seeing people celebrate like 4th of July, or seeing just like the very like the lawn ornament one that I took the picture of, the windmill with the American flag on it. It was in the senior apartments or senior homes of my apartment complex. And so just looking at those individuals who would just sit on their porch with their cute little fluffy dog and just see their like genuine love for like their community, and seeing how that overflowed into their genuine love for their country. I would say there were mixes of beautiful moments in that as well. But then also realizing that I don't have to take the flag so seriously all the time too, or even my own American identity so seriously, and that there is room to have play, to kind of laugh at ourselves and also kind of mourn about it too and celebrate it as well. Yeah.
You have another one? You only get two.
Yeah. Just to follow on from that, as many of you know, I'm British, and I've lived here for about 10 years. And so certain things about America and California specifically are still, alien to me. And I wanted to share an anecdote and then ask you a question. So the anecdote is that in my hometown, which is Tahunga, over near the, further 60 miles west of here, off the two-town, there is every year at the winter holiday time, there's a drive-through nativity scene, because there's a lot of people Christians who live in the town where I live. I'm not a Christian, but there are there. And I remember seeing it for the first time and thinking, oh my God, there's nothing sacred in this country. And I thought, a lot of the things that you talked about earlier, like, is this about like efficiency? So like even people's worship is like, okay, I've got to get this in 5 minutes, we're done. Off we go down to the supermarket, da-da-da. But then I got to thinking over the years as I sort of got used to it, and I still chuckle as I go past the sign for it. But I got to thinking, well, actually the car and the driving through is a really, really kind of principle ritual, or it's a space of ritual. So the roads and the car are the architecture of the church or temple. And flags, of course, are totally crucial to rituals. And I wondered what you thought you know, is what the future of ritual behavior might be in America, or specifically California and Southern California, which is so reliant on cars.
I love that notion of ritual. It makes me think of like kind of, and it probably is where the drive-through nativity that you're speaking of stems, but like annual driving through and looking at all of the like Christmas lights on, I forget the name of the street, but it was like Christmas Street or something like that, where you drive through, have your cup of hot cocoa and your blanket in the car, and it feel like just a very like you said, sacred moment. I think that also our culture has like embraced, like you said, elements of like driving through as part of the culture due to the pandemic too, which is where a lot of this kind of spurred from. Both of my sisters, unfortunately, both graduated in the year of the pandemic, and so both of them had like either one had no graduation until years later, and the other one had a drive-through graduation. So they had like everyone rallying around the car and having like the party poppers, but with masks, and and then playing Pop and Circumstance from the like parking lot and whatnot, and thinking that that was in its own way more memorable and dear to heart for some people, just because of its unusuality. But I would say, that it has kind of embedded itself in American ritual as a short answer.
I think we have time for a couple more.
Okay, cool.
Any other questions? No, Mary, you have, I think we have one from YouTube. Should I try? You guys probably need a good laugh. Wait, show me where this again. You know what? I give up.
Okay, Rob asked, Rob Ray, he asked if you would mind sharing something like a creative spark that made its way into the show. He mentioned that you did talk about the dog, but perhaps another.
A creative spark, you said?
Yeah.
So can he define creative spark? Because I feel like, there's the creative spark where you wake up in the middle of the night and you're like, I got the poem. And so then you just start like writing it like mad, and then you don't go to bed till you finish it. That I guess could be construed as a creative or mad spark. But I would say just the act, I would say, of driving around when I felt literally in the early days of COVID when we didn't know what it was, and really how seriously to take it, and just the act of driving with just you and your significant other without contacting anyone felt like such a rebellion as well. Felt like a creative spark, as well as like just the filming process. But I'm not quite sure what that word encompasses, so I don't know how to best answer that. Okay, thank you.
Rob will accept it.
Rob will accept it. Thank you, Rob.
Thanks, Rob. Okay, I think we're just about to the end. Are there any other questions before we end? I do have, Mary, you have a question?
Yeah, you had a question.
Yeah,
Okay.
Mary gets the last question.
I guess it relates to ritual as well, but I'm just curious how you worked with, you brought up a lot of really complicated ideas, but I have a very simple question about how did you work with the cheerleaders, and how did that impact your work? Was it performance? Did it become animation? Did you actually write cheers?
So the cheerleading work is actually an entirely separate work. I shared it earlier in my research spotlight this week, but I was a cheerleader of 9 years. If you cannot tell by my very peppy, animated lecture style, I think it throws some of my students off a bit. But this kind of pressure to always be like smiling even while in like physical agony, because I tore my ACL, with a sprained ankle, so I literally had 2 legs out of commission and was still like jumping and tumbling, and that act of always having to be like, not just smiling, but exaggeratedly where like people from across the stadium could see you happy. I, at the same time, was thinking about mental health and whatnot, because I was struggling with it a little bit myself at the time of like post-grad and whatnot. And I was curious about like what that actually looks like in the brain. And so in cheerleading, you do a lot of elements of like balancing and counterbalancing with one another. There's two, well, technically in a traditional all-girl stunt group, there are 3 girls that lift 1 flyer. And so the 2 have to stand equally apart, creating a stable platform, the person in the back pulling up. And that's like the ideal circumstance. Usually though, someone maybe doesn't lift too much or try as hard, or maybe like their wrist is a little skewed and it doesn't create the perfect platform. And so in the brain too, like the way that chemicals are released, it's constantly counterbalancing from itself. Like if there's not enough dopamine, more serotonin sometimes steps in. And there was just all these beautiful metaphors between like the pyramidal neuron and also the cheer pyramid, or like jumping the synaptic gap to send messages, or actually having the cheerleader jump and be thrown into the air. And so it was an exhibition that I looked at like the like kind of poetry of like flexibility and balance against the actual like psychology of like neurobiology. So that's the short answer for what was my MFA thesis.
That sounds great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you for your questions. Thank you to those of us joined us on YouTube, or those who joined us on YouTube. And thank you again, Taylor. That was wonderful. Thank you all.
Thank you.